Hi everyone, my name is Carl Bowden. I'm the founder of Exemplify Leadership, Coaching and Consulting. And today I have with me Robert Feeney and B.W. Barkley with KaaS, so Knowledge as a Service. Now Robert and B.W., they've been making a lot of big strides here in Wichita. They've done many crowdfunding activities here in Wichita to really start the investing community. They've also made strides in developing a technology that revolutionizes leadership and human behavior change. Now, Robert, BW, I was really curious to find out, how does technology really drive human behavior? And how does that affect leadership? How does that affect human relationships? So what does leadership mean to you guys?
That's a loaded question, man. I like that.
Yeah. Well, start out on what does leadership mean to us, and then, I think it's a really good overarching question about how does technology impact leadership. So leadership for us is, since we run a company, I can just kind of give you our perspective. A lot of times you talk about accountability. Is one of these ways that leadership is exemplified in the world, is you're making sure that a team or people are held accountable. There's a coldness to that terminology, right?
It's coldness. Okay.
Don't you? If you say, "Oh, we're going to be accountable," it's not that it's bad. It's just there's a coldness to it. It's like, "Oh, I got to be accountable." It feels like homework. It feels like hard. It feels like discipline.
The chopping block is only a step away.
That's right. It's liability, man. It's going to hurt if I'm not accountable. And that is because a lot of times the way that it's executed in the world is, here's what you got to do. If you don't do it, then, and whatever follows that is a consequence, right? Now that may all be valid, but there's something missing in that, I believe, from the human perspective. When a leader is giving forth a vision and then asking everybody to be accountable to that, and you give people measurable accountability. This is really key, right? It's like if you don't make it measurable, then everyone's like, whoa, what am I accountable to, right? But if you make it measurable, then the thing that's often missing is empowering them to meet that accountability goal.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key, is the empowerment part.
Yeah. So you really want to empower people.
Yeah.
You want to help measure success. Now you've identified a few issues with leadership. We want to hold people accountable. But if people don't know how much that leader cares, they're not going to make any change. And that's where there's a gap, is that human connection with the people that they serve in leadership. Is exactly what you identified there. So what are some issues within developing people that we need to start instilling in our leaders?
Oh, I have a favorite point of view on this, on what it is that you instill in people, instill in leaders so that they can be most effective with their people. And then BW, you might have something to say about that. BW, I consider a very powerful leader, and we're very different in how we approach it. Yeah. I think that all leaders, myself, need to have, I personally think they need to have vision.
Vision.
Now, why do I think they have to have that? Because without a track of vision laid down, people become almost entirely task-oriented. I got to get to this goal, or I got to finish this task. All of that's valid. You got to have that done. But if it's not on a track toward a vision that everybody gets their hearts and their minds connected to, then leadership hasn't actually been laid out. So I would have every leader in the world, if I could snap my fingers, they would all say, you know what? It's my job to lay the vision out, and then to enroll everybody that I'm here to lead to stay on that vision.
Awesome.
It's a very interesting question about how to inspire leaders to be better leaders. And what I think about is inspiring people to believe that they can reach their highest potential with the vision, a very clear vision in mind. It's got to be a very clear goal, because you have a unified vision for a company or a unified family. It can be the same thing. There's a leader in a family, and you'll go all the way if you if you're unified and engaged. So if there's an engagement from leaders with people, their company, then it allows that empowerment, I think, to be compounded, to be really just multiplied.
Yeah.
So I think that the leaders need to be with the people, and the people need to see themselves as leaders. It's like a unified effort.
That's
that
a big
goes
thing
on there.
Yeah, it's that people even seeing themselves as having leadership behaviors too, because leader isn't always necessarily the man or woman on top. We think of it that way a lot of times, but it's not necessarily. It's having everybody realize that we all have leadership behaviors we can take on. That's an empowerment issue right there. Empower people to know that they can execute.
Yeah, and so this comes down to exercises in trust building. In my experience in working with people that have big names and over the years in entertainment, technology, it's when I'm trusted by them to do my job, and when I'm inspired to reach further, and there's not that micromanagement going on, and we share the same vision, going back to the vision, I feel like, man, I can do this. I can take this on, and I can actually cause an impact in my company, and I'm trusted.
Yeah.
So if leaders trust their people, and the people think, okay, I'm trusted, and it's not an accountability default where I'm only trusted if I'm accountable. There's got to be some of this ongoing conversation happening at all times. That's the real, I think, accountability.
Yeah.
What's the degree of conversation that is alive and meaningful every day that can be measured? And that's what gets into our technology.
Yeah.
Is how we have the real time data coming back on how engaged people are and what they're learning about and what they care about.
Totally. Yeah.
Forces, by the way, the employer to see where they're failing with habit building, and that's really, we can get into that.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that here in a bit, but you guys touched on some very important points there. So a leader must have vision. They have to know where they're going. That leads to empowerment and trust. Those leaders have to develop those qualities, those values within themselves to give to others. It's not about us anymore as a leader, right? It's about others, getting on their level, showing them that you care, showing them that they matter to you. That leads to inspiration, like what you said, BW.
Yeah, and I think there's so much more. When we talk about leadership, what is leadership, and examples of leadership, there's just so much that's there that it's almost as if it's a puzzle of all these values and principles that come together and it's demonstrated in real life. And so it comes back to demonstration. Braveheart, love the movie Braveheart, right?
It's awesome.
And that's an example of a certain kind of leader that's in battle, right? But he put his life on the line.
Yeah.
So if a leader is not invested, in my opinion, all the way in the vision, invested all the way, even financial investment has to be there. There's got to be a pain point or a price that will impact that leader as well. And I think that's going to allow people to want to come around that and say, you know what, that person's human and they're in it to win it. I like that. That's another piece of that inspiration that we have there.
What do you guys think of humility when it comes to being a leader?
What's that? No.
Yeah, what's that?
I've cried all my rivers. No.
Well, I think anybody who is a leader grapples with that, because what usually has us become a leader is that either people have pushed us into that position or we have driven ourselves to it, and that takes a certain amount of ego.
Mm-hmm.
You got to drive and say, my way, the way that I say it ought to be, is worth realizing.
And that's more of a director style of leadership right there, right?
Well,
I mean,
when you're
styles.
executing it with people, it can come across as a director style leadership. But I'm even just speaking from the personal experience of a leader, right? It's like I want to execute something in the world, and so even just me in my own quiet times, my ego is saying, "Here's what's to do. Here's what's to do."
Yeah.
Then what I think is really interesting in the question is, how do you then turn that around and empower other people to go through a vision, to realize a vision, and essentially disappear in that process?
Yeah.
Like, how can you do that? And every single leader I've ever heard of, including the two of us, deal with that. Because if you could, ideally, in a perfect world, you could have everybody empowered to execute on a vision. And you were instrumental in laying out the vision, but it also grew organically out of the people you're leading. And then you could disappear and they carried it forward. That'd be perfect. It'd be ideal, right?
Yeah.
But I'll say one other thing too that's in that. In the humility, I think needs to be a thirst, like a compulsion to empower people. Like that can't just be something to do because you think it's a good leadership behavior. Like you got to grow that appetite in you that other people around you are to be empowered. So it's a go-to habit that you have as a leader. When we've had leadership behaviors delivered by customers of ours in our software, what they're there to do is to awaken in the individual employees in the organization, and also just kind of culturally en masse, that you have leadership behaviors you execute in your life all the time. And it's not about the organization, really. It's not like it's all about the organization or all about the leader. It's all about you. You are the organization, right?
Totally, yeah.
And the thing I was mentioning in the beginning that's missing a lot of times in the accountability conversation or in training conversations is empowering people to actually carry that forward. And because the reason it's missing, and this is kind of the big punchline, this is the whole thing that brought our technology into existence. The reason it's missing is because of what people perceive to be time, the problem of time in your day. We think that, well,
It's deep.
yeah, well, if we think when you come out of school, you got a classroom, you spend, 6 hours or something in your school, you're doing that every day, there's plenty of time you're putting into the learning process. But if you want to bring leadership behaviors or change a culture or train people in an organization after school, like meaning after they've graduated from college or whatnot and they've gone into the workforce, you can't have people in school all day long. You can't have them in there 6 days. 6 hours a day. So there's this thought that, oh, we don't have time. So instead, what I'm going to do is deliver the information, and then everybody has to study it. And let's go. But the reality is none of us do that. We get forced to go through a classroom, and we're like, we're falling asleep in the class, or, I have to click through an e-learning course, and I just want to cheat my way through it. This is reality. And it's, by the way, it's done by leaders too. The leaders who speak about ethics, then they go through the e-learning class and they're trying to cheat their way through it. Look, it's human nature. We're like, I don't have time.
Yeah, Robert, if I may, I would love to know, I think everyone would maybe like to know this, is can you, because you've worked with the government, with the projects we've done, to top CEOs and you name it, can you maybe tell a story or give an example of a leader that was well known as a leader, right? Well known, and what you saw in that experience, what was the good, bad, and the ugly, and what you may see as missing, or what we added with our project that really helped to take it to a next level.
Yeah, gosh, I've got a number of them.
Just one.
All right. Okay, so there's a.
Don't say their name.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a giant. It's a giant nonprofit that used our software for a leadership behaviors training. And this nonprofit is so large that they operate like a Fortune 500 company.
Yeah.
So they've got that kind of matrixed organization. They're all across the country, across the United States. And the new CEO came in and said, I have 5 leadership behaviors that I want to have enculturated in every one of the employees in this company. Tens of thousands of employees, right? So those 5 leadership behaviors were delivered to everybody in fairly traditional mode. They were delivered by email. They had a town hall meeting, and the CEO addressed everybody and said, everybody has these behaviors. It was actually a compelling talk that he gave. And then there was a poster put up in the cafeteria at headquarters, that said 5 leadership behaviors. As soon as you walked out from your meal, you couldn't help but see the 5 leadership behaviors.
Yeah.
Perfectly normal way of doing it. The problem is that when they did a survey several months into this after the town hall, they found that nobody that they surveyed actually could name the leadership behaviors. They could name 1, maybe 2, Now, they'd already had a training, they'd already had the town hall, and every single day coming out of the cafeteria, they had 5 leadership behaviors, and they still couldn't name them. Because the reality of how our brains work is not that.
So it sounds like what I'm hearing here is that leadership or a leader must have support with technology in order to have that message turn into habits, to turn into a behavior change. Because this leader may have been, in fact, may is a phenomenal leader, a great leader, right?
Charismatic, in fact, and
Yeah.
people just really were interested in what he had to say.
The thing is, though, because our attention spans keep getting reduced and shrunk. Now it's less than a goldfish, less than 6 seconds. We got to keep shaking people up to pay attention. Leaders have to use technology, and that's
Yeah.
where our software comes in. It
Yeah.
allows the leader to be effective.
Yeah, I really like that. And I want to touch on just a few points that you guys had mentioned earlier. When it comes to humility, it's really hard for leaders to have humility because they're scared of being wrong. We look at our leaders as being perfect beings, but we're not perfect.
Yeah.
No one's perfect. But when we can be humble, admit our mistakes, that's when we connect with others.
Yeah.
And the thing about leadership is that it's not a position. That's what the Kansas Leadership Center would say. Now, John Maxwell, one of the most world-renowned leadership experts, he would say that leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. But what is leadership? And how do we instill those qualities, those values within each person?
Yeah.
Now, everyone's different, right? So how do we find that potential within others to lift them up to their strengths? How do they lead effectively?
Very good. Very, very good. I'll tell you, I'll go first, man, because I'm going to lead this one. So, my feeling is that, and with experience and just the way I'm seeing it now, is that a leader is someone who is responsible and is able to. It's a way of being that by being responsible and by being all in, it's people cannot help but be inspired by that and reaching the full potential of performance. And this comes back to our software again.
Yeah.
When an individual can peak out, even if it's just an experience of I peaked out. Now that could be you hit a home run, you win a game. You're like, I got that potential to win games. I've got the potential to close that $1 million SaaS deal or whatever it is, to close a deal for $250 on the crowdfunding or whatever. I've got that potential. And then they can sustain that with technology. In other words, the advertising, I know I may be bouncing around, but okay, the advertising industry, they're tremendous leaders in how to sell products and how to have people mimic what they do. And I mean, it's just repetition, and people are buying this stuff. But that's what keeps things coming in with the money. It's sales, and it's making the impact. The point is, when you can have a person reach their potential and keep them there, that way of being can be unlocked because they're at a high performance level. It kind of opens up a new realm, a new way of living life where it inspires people.
People actually we all have to feel incentivized to do what we do, or else we're not going to fall. And if a leader is able to speak in such a way that we're following that person, it's because I see what's in it for me. Now, we'd love to think that it's all altruistic. There's a lot of us who figure, it's got to be about everybody else around us. But every human brain is calibrated to think about itself, its own survival. So a leader can very effectively calm down that survival mechanism by instilling trust, by not just saying, but actually showing that I'm here for you, I am here to empower you to get what you need for yourself.
Totally.
Then the survival, inflames that inflammation that the brain will take on, which is it's amazing. There's actually neurologically, it's the midbrain that jumps up and says, no, I got to make sure that I'm looking out for number one. If you can calm that down and let the cortex get in there and say, here's what I need to achieve, my goals for my family, to be successful. Let's say if I have a financial goal for myself, I want to earn a certain amount of money, a creative goal, a communal goal, whatever those are. If I know that I'm empowered to do that, great. And one thing that I've found helps make that happen is generally call it conversation. Okay, very generally, conversation. When you become a larger and larger organization, keeping a conversation going in your enterprise is very hard. It's very hard. So every leader faces this, and the bigger the organization grows, the harder it is to keep the conversation. That's why BW is saying you need a technology to be able to do that. But the technology itself isn't going to do it, because email doesn't keep conversation very well. Why? Because it feels like I've got an inbox as long as my arm, and I can't possibly keep up with all the chores I've been given in this inbox. It wasn't maybe that way in the beginning, but it is now. Right? So you need other technologies that can cut through the clutter and keep a conversation going in a way that it actually matters to me. Like I'm pulled forward. What's in it for me? And then once that what's in it for me is clear, and I feel continually engaged in the conversation, then I want to start giving.
Contribution.
I want to be a contribution.
And trusting you to contribute.
There you go.
Man.
That's great insight. I really appreciate all that, Robert and BW. Like that's amazing. Now, we've identified what leadership is. We've identified, there's different aspects in our lives that makes us a leader, and how we can cater to how we use our strengths to lead others effectively. Now I want to bring it to your technology, finally. We've identified some issues with leadership, connecting with people, holding people accountable, inspiring others. How does your technology help solve some of these issues? How is this going to really bring productivity, encouragement, empowerment, inspiration to others?
Yeah, man. It's a key question, and I'm going to piggyback on what he said about the conversation. Our technology is an ongoing conversation. It's what it promotes. It's an ongoing conversation with the content and with all the people that are engaged in the content, and it's in a micro way to where it's reinforced, it's sustained, it's lifted, it activates the potential, which is through the habit building. We're talking about the advertising industry again. They're great at building habits. That's why I got my Starbucks, right?
Yeah.
So that continual conversation is key.
Yeah.
Without it, it's almost we've not found that it's even possible to sustain it.
We should
You'll
actually.
have it.
There's some people who are listening probably have no idea what the technology is. We should actually describe what it. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the technology?
What is it? Because we're speaking in concepts here.
Please do explain it.
Okay. All right. So the technology is it's called Ring-a-Rang.
Okay.
Which is a play on the word boomerang. So the idea is that there's an app that's on your Android or iPhone, and it alerts you at scheduled times in the day, but you as the learner don't know when. So you don't know when it's going to come up, and it'll alert you and ask if you want to engage in a question, one question about one thing, and it takes you about a minute to answer it. And you've got little gateways you can go through. There's a clue, then there's the answering of the question, then there's a quick insight. There's an opportunity to go off and learn more about it if you want, but that's optional. You can just simply answer the question and then you're done.
You get to see your points, your score right or wrong. You get to go back and look at like a review of the timeline. We call it a timeline where you can see what happened. It's a lot of good interactivity.
It's competitive in a really light way. So it just kind of keeps you aware of what all the other employees are doing and how they're progressing, and you get a kind of a social relationship going on there, and people talk about it while this is going on because it's fun and it's a welcoming way to come back to the content that you're trying to get across to your employees, which is usually some extension of a training. You want, like, let's say it's leadership training. You're trying to get people to awaken those 5 behaviors, for example. Or it's a compliance training that everyone's going, oh gosh, I don't want to go through that compliance training again. But now it makes it interesting, and it puts it into more of a context like a conversation does.
Yeah. So it's that continuous conversation.
Yeah.
That's incentivized.
Incentivized, yeah.
And it's the play pattern makes it fun, so it's a continuous fun incentivized conversation.
In bite-sized pieces
Right.
that are short enough that you actually feel respected. This is the thing we found across all of our customers is the employees actually feel like you're respecting their what? Their time. Because everybody's in this time conversation in their head. The leaders as well as employees. I don't have time. Don't give me one more thing I got to think about. So
Right.
the industry that has mastered this is not the learning industry. Not until now. Not until we brought our technology to it. The industry that has mastered this is advertising.
Advertising.
This is so interesting. I wanted to go back, digress a minute about time.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've heard time doesn't exist, right? You've heard this, people say time is just man-made, it doesn't exist, right?
Oh, this sounds conceptual.
So, well, what happens though, when someone is at work looking at a 2-hour course they have to do, we just talked to some executives this morning at a big company in Wichita, talking about this time. When you look at it at something that takes your time, you feel it steals time, that time goes all the way from the beginning of your day, sleep time, time with the baby, all the way through your life. It's not just, okay, time at work. It's like, that's time I could be going home early. I could get more sleep. So that is what we're talking about. When you steal time, it actually belittles their entire life. An employee's life is just, you might as well just cut them down. Doesn't work.
Especially if they feel like the time they are spending or investing is not getting them anywhere.
Yeah.
That's where they get disempowered. And the reason that we then applied advertising techniques to the learning industry is because typically in the corporate world, learning shows up as a learning event, a classroom, or an e-learning, right? And it's done. And after that, the learner knows that they will forget. And what's worse is they know that the organization knows that they will forget.
And that's a problem with leadership right there,
Isn't
that
it?
we rely on those events to really have a huge transformation.
We rely on the event, just what you said. We rely on it, and then what we're relying on fails us.
But the thing is with leadership and change is that it takes time. That continuous conversation.
Right.
No one's going to be changed on one particular event.
Right.
But if we have that continuous conversation that lasts months,
Yep.
Right.
a year,
Right.
And
maybe even a lifetime, that's
Yes.
when positive change is going to happen. And that's what it sounds like your technology does.
Yeah,
And
I mean, because imagine if you went into a company, any company, and you say to the leader, hey, this change conversation is going to take you a year or two. Let's go. Most of the time they'll go, that sounds great, but I don't have time.
We don't have
My
the
people don't have time. So advertising, what did they figure out? No one has time for them. And no one's ever taken a class on Doublemint gum or, Doritos or something like that. You've never taken a class on the Chevy that you want to buy because no one has time for it. But advertisers have somehow figured out how to get into the in-between moments of our day with a value proposition that we want to hear about. And if we don't want to hear about it, we ignore it. Even if we do want to hear about it, we might ignore it the first few times. And then the fourth repetition, we go, that Chevy, I was thinking about a car I might want to buy. And then you remember that commercial, right? So the conversation that you get to have with your employees when you have a distributed organization has to take on that interweaving in the flow of their work, in the flow of their day, if you want them to welcome it, if you want them to feel respected.
See, with what I do as a leadership coach, I am continuously holding people accountable when I'm with them, which is great. It's awesome. And it's usually over like a 6-month period, sometimes even longer, because then that's when we can make some positive change.
Sure.
But I've realized in my practice that I can't always hold them accountable. Now, they have to hold themselves accountable. One thing with your technology, they're referring to what they need to hold themselves accountable to without me being there.
Yep.
So it just continues and continues when I can't physically be there.
So
now,
I'm sorry, go
I
ahead.
will say it is important to have that human value aspect there. People want to know that, their leader wants to be with them.
Yep.
They want to spend time for them. They feel valued. They feel inspired.
right. So
Now, when it comes to human relations, maybe you guys can speak to this. When we have all this technology, does that decrease the human connection?
It's sort of kind of the zeitgeist is, oh gosh, the more technology we have, the less connected we are. We hear that a lot. I find myself saying that in some ways. Because it's true, but it's not technology generally that does that. It's how we use the technology that causes that.
That's a good point.
You know, we gave that a lot of deep thought in building the play pattern about the technology taking over people's lives and the dehumanizing, or the seclusion and all that. And so that's why we created it to be 60 seconds and you're out. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be a game that plays you. It plays people when they least expect it. It reaches out, grabs the employees for just 60 seconds. And then what happens is it drops off in the conversation. The space is there to have a conversation.
Yeah, it continues.
It inspires a conversation. Right. And we've seen it happen time and time again. Question goes off right here. We all play in real time. We're done in 60 seconds. I'm going to talk about that with the next person I see. What did you answer? What place are you on the leaderboard? Did you win anything? Or actually, I don't know if I agree with that's the conversation. And so we use technology because it's everywhere, and people to not use it would mean we wouldn't be able to engage.
Yeah, especially at scale.
Yeah.
There's no way you can't ignore it.
Well, actually, one other thing I wanted to add, too, that you'll appreciate as a coach, right? Because coaching has become more and more of a thing. It's now more of a role in the world than it's not just on the sports field, right? It's coaching in life, coaching for executives, coaching in leadership, coaching in your regimen around your diet. There's coaching because we've seen the value of getting in there with someone and keeping a conversation going and having an accountability partner in it, right?
Exactly.
So what BW is describing there is like an accountability partner, but there's one key element that we found has to go in there, and we took this through clinical trials when we developed our technology. We worked with the federal government and national labs and universities, and had it published out multiple times that we could change human behavior with this mode of communication. And here was the key that we found. It was asking the person to always take an action. So you're not just asking them to answer a question or giving them prizes or making it fun. That's what keeps them coming back.
Yeah.
But once they come back, you got to ask them to go put that into life somewhere. And then you start keeping accountability on, did they do that? Exactly. Did they form a habit by doing it many times? Yeah. Right? That's key. And as a coach, you got to ask them to take action, right?
Exactly.
And then what we found, one other thing that's really interesting that was missing until we identified it, was the obstacle. Now, what we call the obstacle, it's a mental obstacle. Another way of putting it is it's an attitude. So when there's always an attitude there with every human being. You walked into this room, and we did, each of us having our own attitudes about what this interview would be.
Imagine if we said them out loud. We'd all have different attitudes.
We all have different attitudes all the time, and it informs everything we say and do. When you ignore that, and you ask someone to go do something, guess what the first resistance is that comes up?
Attitude.
I don't have time. Primary attitude that we all have when we're asked to do something.
Time!
No time. Or, why would you ask me to do that? I got 15 other things, including going to be with my baby at, 5 o'clock instead of staying at work late. So when we identify, we give our customers the opportunity to identify in their curriculum they build in our tools, what's the mental obstacle when you ask them to take that action? Is it, I don't have time? Is it, I have a better way of doing this? Or is it, this isn't for me, this is for other people, but they're forcing me to take this? Acknowledge that. Acknowledge that's there. Respect that it's there. In fact, you as an organization might have put it there. The leader may have created that attitude with that person.
Exactly.
Acknowledge it, and then give them, as BW said, an opening, a space where the conversation can continue through taking actions together on a vision.
Leadership is action.
It is.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not leadership if you're not taking action.
That's right.
Yep.
If you're not creating some productivity within whatever it is that mission is that you're committed to.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to ask you a few challenging questions too. I know everyone might be thinking it, but with this continual accountability, continually checking your phone. Now, is that gonna, involve some kind of distraction there? Is that gonna inhibit people from work?
Statistically, we check our phones on average 30 times a day. And that's not 13-year-olds. That's across all ages. And most of those checks are done during the work hours. So what oftentimes doesn't get acknowledged really well in corporate leadership and management is that we need to have our decompression moments. Sometimes they do. Sometimes the really good health and wellness oriented thinkers in corporate world will say, you got to take your breaks, right? Certainly there are labor unions that have required that. But decompression is as important as compression. Like equally important. Like if you don't sleep, what happens? You got to decompress for many hours every night.
Definitely.
Right? In a very concentrated way. So what happens is in those 30 checkpoints on your phone, if you leverage some of that time to make it useful and empowering for the person when they do start to compress again on their work. So it's not just decompress and do something purely mindless. Also give someone a seed that plants in their mind. You know, if I do this once I start working again, it might actually improve what I'm doing. Now you go into your next work cycle with some hope.
And it's important to emphasize that this is micro learning. So these are little pieces throughout the day. It may only be 3 questions a day or 2, but they're just little micro things like this so that they really aren't that disruptive at all, really. You're talking about maybe 3 to 6 minutes a day total time across all that engagement. And if you're busy, you don't have to engage with that live question. If you don't have the time or you just can't take it, it's okay. You can come back and control when you want to play that question.
Yeah. Robert, there's one thing that you said earlier that really stuck out to me. And you said that technology is not the problem. What we do with technology, that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So really it lies within us in our behavior and how we continually act, create habits. So it's really about creating positive habits to be more productive, reduce those distractions. And BW, what you said, it's micro. This isn't going to be a distraction, but it's just a continual accountability. Continually having that conversation. Now, there's another question I want to ask you that might be a little challenging. Now, when it comes to human health, being with technology all the time, or maybe not having as much human interaction or inspiration from a physical leader, how does that affect users?
Do you mean like because we stay a little disconnected because we're with our technology and maybe not with other people?
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very good. And we started touching on that a little bit earlier. It's the way we use technology. So for example, if I would say in the background of that is that we all have some form of compulsion that we're able to fall into. Something that we'll just do and do and do and do until we burn ourselves out on. And it's different for everybody. Some people to an acute level, and that's where you get into addictions, right? Which can be very unhealthy, right? But on average, there's just small little ways we do that, but we can get carried away. We address that we think that there's a certain responsibility that a leader can take on for not tripping up people's compulsion. Now, it's not like if somebody's going to be compulsive about technology, it's all on the leader. However, the leader can be cognizant of that. When we thought through this early on in developing Ring-A-Rang, there was some statistics out there about people will play a casual game and the crown rate is about 3 months. So no matter how interesting or how bad you think a game is, somewhere within 3 months you're going to hit your peak and then eventually you're going to lose interest. So, game companies were thinking about that on the life cycle of their customer. So we thought, well, if we're really trying to keep people engaged for months at a time, we have to think about a play pattern that's actually going to keep them engaged and they're not going to burn out on it. So we created one where that's why we call it the game that plays you. It's going to tell you when there's a question to answer. So administratively, the people who are in leadership of the organization schedule it out over time so that you can't burn out on it. Your first habit that you're instilling is to be responsive. Be responsive when your organization is asking you a question and wants to see if it can stimulate in you something that'll be empowering for you and also on track with the company's vision. And we just found in testing that over the years that play pattern, as long as the content was relevant to the person, that play pattern would keep people going indefinitely.
It's important to do that,
Yeah.
because it's really hard to keep going.
Yeah, it is.
We get exhausted.
Yeah, especially when we're isolated. Like you said,
Yeah.
when technology gets us so that we're disconnected from people, there's something that happens to the brain and your psychology and your heart where you can get depressed.
Mm-hmm.
So it was very important not only to have people, not trip people up on their compulsions and get them addicted to things, but also consider how you can make it social. How can you make it expansive? So that when you get that question, you see how you're doing in relation to other people, and you start talking about it with them. You chat with them. If you see them in the same facility, you tease them about where they are on the leaderboard. And, hey, wasn't that a stupid question? And blah, blah, blah. But it gets them talking about what the organization wants them considering.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned something earlier about compression and decompression. We all have to have that. Now, it sounds like to me that with your technology, it's creating those gaps for decompression to recharge.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing the work for you.
Yeah.
It's being more efficient with that time that you keep saying. We're all worried about time. Now, when we don't have to worry about time, we can get it automated in micro levels. That's when we can really reach our potential. Now, I love the technology. You guys are doing amazing things here in Wichita.
Thank you.
You're really making an impact. I want to ask you guys, what spurred this thought to start this business? Now, I know you have a story that you've mentioned many times to places that you've spoken here in Wichita. What is that story?
Well, the origins of Ring-a-Rang came from a personal tragedy in my life. When I was growing up with my older brother Tommy, my younger brother Michael, they both had really serious mental illnesses. It was an acute form of bipolar. Both of them struggled with mightily, and then both of them ended up taking their own lives. So by the time I was in my young adulthood, I was without brothers. It was the 3 Feeney boys, and now became 1 Feeney boy. And I'm trying to reorient my life without brothers. And I wanted to figure out, what does it take for a person to take on some new behavior that could make their life work however they're made up? Whether they have a mental illness, or whether they've got a physical illness, or whether they've just got certain ways that they're oriented in the world that don't work, and they want to take on a behavior that works. Same thing is, how do you let go of a behavior that you don't want? So that took me into Hollywood, which is where I met BW. Both of us were very captivated by the idea that you could make stories that would be aspirational and would have people, want to consider other possibilities beyond just the routine of their life. And then, because we were in Hollywood, what became very obvious as a powerful form of storytelling and habit formation was advertising. And everything kind of was that, it started us on this path of figuring out what's the most effective way of telling a story so that it works in people's lives any way that they're oriented, and in whatever the flow of their work or their routine is.
Yeah, I love that story. It's amazing.
Well, and kind of to bring it around full circle too, we've been doing this in really large corporations like Fortune 50 tech companies, because they're usually the thought leaders, and they have a performance goal they're trying to hit in sales, or they're trying to do enterprise change. But BW's been super supportive of me in this all along. It's like, how do we get this around to health and wellness? Well, an opportunity finally came into our view this year, and it is to work with opioid addiction recovery.
Okay.
Where there is always mental illness and substance abuse going on at the same time. 2-year cycles of recovering, for a person who needs to make their life work, and you want them to be able to go home to a family and have something to look forward to in their life, but they're just caught. How to help them get into new habits that work for them, like you said, positive habits, That's what it's all about. There's a group called Community Medical Services that's using Ringerang for just that. And now there's been this, it's opened up a dialogue now with a number of other organizations that have reached out to us and said, hey, we've got this other issue on either substance abuse or mental illness. And I just kind of feel like it's like God's called me forth to do something about this.
Helping to change the world.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm really excited for you guys. You guys are going to do amazing work. We need that leadership, whether that's with technology, within people, within each other. We have to have that leadership there. We need ways to make it efficient. We need to save that time. We want to do things that matter. It sounds like you guys are really doing things that matter.
Thank you.
Now, I want to give you guys the opportunity of how do we get involved? For the people that are watching right now, how do they get involved to add value to your guys' initiative? Is there a way they can, maybe donate to your cause?
Well, it's a great question. As a for-profit business, we're not able to take donations,
Okay. But crowdfunding, right?
Absolutely. Crowdfunding is there's several ways. If someone listening sees a place for Ringerang in their organization or somewhere in the world, specifically in Wichita, we're focused now on Wichita making an impact here. We want to hear about that. We want to hear what company that they're thinking about, where this can go in. We can do a pilot program and get some data and show them results, how we can move the needle, right? Other ways, if people want to own a piece of this and have equity, have shares in our company, they can do it. We are raising money through what's called crowdfunding. And crowdfunding allows the average Jack and Jill to come in and buy shares for as little as $250 for 500 shares at the moment. Right now the shares are priced at 50 cents a share. We're a private company, and as a private company we are open to anybody to come in and get a piece of the deal. We have a website that highlights all the deal terms, the potential, how much money might be made from this from investors. And that website is wefunder.com/KaaS, acronyms for our company. And so we invite everybody to go check it out. It's actually clicking along pretty good. We've already raised over $100,000 from the crowd, and a lot of people in Wichita are part of it. And again, $250 is the minimum buy-in. 500 shares at the moment for the early bird phase. That's the discounted phase to come in.
Awesome. Well, that's great. So wefunder.com.
Yeah, wefunder.com/KaaS. It really allows the public to own our company. And we're a private company. We don't have to be a public IPO on the stock market. People can own our company.
Didn't used to be legal to do this. I mean, it used to be you had to be a public company in order to get out to everybody. And legislation has only changed in this last decade, and it's been refined significantly, in the last year, right? With Regulation CF.
The adjustments,
So it's opened up a whole new way to democratize investing and enable a community like Wichita. You don't have to be an accredited investor or a professional investor. You can be anybody who wants to have a part of something that's a Wichita venture, and it just makes us so excited because we feel like the Wichita community that we're committed to can touch us, can communicate with us, we can communicate with them, and it's like we're all in this together and we can build things together.
Look, I'll tell you, I'm a native Wichitan, born and raised, most all my family here in the Midwest, in Kansas specifically here, and the idea that we can make an impact on the entrepreneurial community to show them there's another way to raise money. It's called crowdfunding. Carl, we made history. We made history with being the first crowdfunding campaign in Kansas. Unless someone can prove me wrong, I've looked at the data. I've found there's no other crowdfunding that's been done. We've raised over $100,000, and so it shows other startups how they could raise money, and it also shows the people how they can be involved and own a piece of a startup. And we're all about Wichita and empowerment, leading through action. And that's what we're all about here.
Ooh, see what he did there?
There you go. He brings it back around.
Ring-a-rang!
That's right. We boomeranged
Yeah,
it.
there you go.
Thanks, man.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me on this interview. You guys are going to do amazing things. I'm excited for you guys to grow in your business and take it to that next level. It's really all about community. Holding each other accountable, but caring for each other.
Yeah, empowering people in that process.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So thank you guys once again for joining me here today. And thank you guys for joining. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.
It's all right.
That was good.
Yep.